Hi, everyone. Welcome. We will give it a couple of minutes just to get everyone piling in here, and we will get started. Thank you all for joining us.
I had to get it started, Rachel. I couldn't wait.
I know. Break the ice. I love it, Robert.
I
All
was
right.
telling Rachel, everyone, that it is college basketball season for me, so I'm ready.
Oh, Robert, you messaged host and panelist
Oh,
the drop down for everyone.
Robert, share your question live.
I just want to know if we have any college basketball fans. I think March is the best time of the year. It's like Christmas for me, so I always love to see, who different people are backing. I'm a U of A guy, I'll admit. All we have is college basketball, so this is the best and most heartbreaking time of the year every time.
Amazing. So yeah, feel free to use the chat to either ask questions about the webinar or talk about March Madness. All right, let's actually get started too while we do that. First off, welcome. Thank you all for being here. Super excited for this conversation. We have, I'm really excited about this specific topic. I've talked to many folks in the Parks and Recreation world about data and storytelling and how we bring that into the world of Parks and Recreation more. Whether it's like inspiring your internal Parks and Rec team to get over the finish line when you're doing summer registration or you're preparing a presentation to city council or commission on getting capital for a new rec center. We know that using data to inspire communities is a really, really critical part of everyone's job. And so super excited to just have this conversation today with some very amazing guests that I will introduce in a second. But before I get there, in case you haven't joined one of Rec's webinar series before, just to kind of give you a little bit of introduction on what that is. Rec Technologies, we put together this webinar series that is all about bringing together both parks and recreation leaders and technology leaders into the same room to have a conversation about a topic, whether it's like today's topic about data and storytelling. We've run webinars in the past that are around brand and how you think about brand in the Parks and Recreation world. We had the CMO of Lululemon come and join, an amazing Parks and Rec leader, Cindy Bagley, and tons more. So if you're interested in ever watching any of the webinars that we've already hosted, go to rec.us. You can access all of those there. Or if you have any ideas or future guests that you think would be awesome to have on this webinar series, please reach out to me directly. And who am I? I'm Rachel. I am one of the co-founders of Rec Technologies. Prior to starting Rec a couple of years ago, I spent my career in the world of consumer technology. So I worked at Uber back in the day. I always say when I joined Uber, my dad thought I was joining a taxi dispatch company. Turned out to be a little bit more than that, and have been a part of kind of a lot of different technology companies over the last decade. Very excited to introduce Rec Technologies to the world. We're kind of the new kids on the block, but have been building recreation software that is mobile first, AI powered, and really personalized to make, to bring a really modern experience to the world of parks and recreation. So feel free to check us out at rec.us. I'd also love to hear from you directly if you'd ever like to chat. My email is simply just Rachel, Rachel, @rec.us. But with that, I am going to jump right in and introduce our amazing two guests today, Harry and Robert. I've had the pleasure of getting to know both of these individuals, and I know data and insights and storytelling is near and dear to both of them, and they have both really interesting, similar but contrasting backgrounds in how they've thought about using the data in the past. So before we get into the content, I would love maybe to have each of you, Harry and Robert, introduce yourselves, share a little bit more about, what data means to you and your kind of background in it, and then we'll take it from there. So Harry, maybe I'll pass it over to you first to say hello.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name's Harry Tannenbaum. I grew up in San Francisco. I have spent a lot of time thinking about how data can impact customer experiences. For about a decade, I worked on helping to build the business and impact at a company called Nest, where we made thermostats and smoke alarms and products for the home. And that company was ultimately acquired by Google. And it was kind of a data double whammy. The products themselves that we were building integrated data into themselves in a really authentic and actionable way. And on top of that, I was responsible with running the analytics and data science organizations at the company that focused on taking all of the data we collected across the organization and figuring out how we could turn it into action. And then more recently, I founded a company called Mill that's focused on keeping food out of the landfill. And we build a machine that eats all the food that you don't eat and leverage data to help individuals make better choices around shopping, cooking, and just understand how much food they're wasting. So really passionate about data, period, and have seen firsthand how it can impact decision making and drive outcomes. I'll pass it
Awesome.
over to Robert.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's good to see everyone. I think one of the most exciting things for me was being able to hear a little bit more about Harry's story. I had to read all about it as soon as we knew we were going to be doing this together. It's pretty fascinating. But I'm the Parks and Rec director for Gilbert, Arizona, so a suburb right outside of Phoenix, about 300,000 people and growing. And really, the biggest part for me into data was I have been a Parks and Rec kid my whole life, from being a user of all the programs, it having a really impactful part of my journey. And then when I was about 16, 17 years old, my first job in Parks and Recreation was in adaptive recreation. So I was in inclusion services with one-on-one care for a little boy with Down syndrome to make sure that he was integrated into all the different camp activities and programs. And it really inspired something in me that after college, I went right back to Parks and Recreation Services. And the reason data and storytelling has been so impactful has been that I feel that we have some of the greatest impact on communities possible. And we don't always do a great job of telling our story, and we don't always know how to share it and to make that impact known to the rest of the community, to councils, to boards, and to the public, even though those members know how impactful it is. So one of the most exciting parts for me is making sure we bridge that gap and be able to share our story at a different level. And if you see the other little circle by my name, Carmona Strategies is something that I founded just for that purpose of being able to go around the rest of the country to businesses, to departments, to nonprofits, et cetera, to make sure we're building that message and sharing that story of how data can provide meaningful impact in those services.
Awesome. Sweet. Thank you. Well, Robert and Harry, welcome. Let's dive into the content. All right. Okay. So, oh, and then I should actually mention before I get there, please use the chat, everybody, to ask any questions. We'll try to make sure we're covering all of those throughout this conversation, and we'll leave some time at the end. But yes, please answer or please ask any questions, and we will make sure we cover them. But maybe just to kind of really set the stage here, I think like Robert, we're going to dive into some of the specific examples that you have with the city of Gilbert, but just at a super broad level and to set the stage for everyone, in your experience, why is data so important to the world of parks and recreation?
Yeah, and I think this is a growing trend within Parks and Recreation because so often I think there's a misconception that Parks and Recreation is just about the classes and programs, and oh, that was nice that happened.
Yeah.
And I think you're starting to see that trend shift of now we're able to show that impact. So when I look at Parks and Recreation, the reason data is so important because it's transforming community amenities and just the thoughts of those into actual strategic assets for communities. It's not just the amenity, it's an asset that the community has that provides those health services, those wellness services, whether it be physical, social, or mental. And that impact on that data is being able to show how it provides that to the community, I think is changing the game of how Parks and Recreation is viewed. And it's only going to continue. And I think when you look at all the different options and services that it provides, and that we're making it easier to get to those services and where those services are. It's just getting started on why that data is important. And it all comes back to the storytelling. And, one thing I'll, get into deeper later on, but, we created a department and division strictly around data and storytelling. And it has provided such a massive impact. We have some of the best people around doing it, but really, being able to share your story in a way that people are able to take the information and visualize it and see it easily, and that you don't have to fully explain it, that you can see it and visualize it and understand that impact right away, should be something we're all focusing a lot more time on, for that impactful data.
That's awesome. Cool. All right. Well, I'm going to hold you to it. Let's dig in a little bit more on kind of like how you created that that group at the department, because I'm sure that's going to be super interesting to folks on the call. But maybe just to flip it over, Harry, obviously, in your world, data is very important. It's not a Parks and Recreation department, and you've done it in kind of a different industry. But how does both kind of like, what does data mean in your world, and like how does that compare or contrast to what Robert was saying in the world of Parks and Rec?
Look, what Robert just shared could have been straight out of the mouth of an analytics leader inside Google right now. And I think that's something that is really interesting and really exciting, that the same way, to me, just listening to what Robert was saying, the same way Robert is thinking about how data can empower, individuals inside an organization to drive impact and tell great stories, is the same way we were talking about it sort of in the tech universe. I would say, on this slide, are two products that I've had the privilege to work on and build. And honestly, thermostats, garbage cans, they're not necessarily the coolest, most loved things in your home. And what, my journey has sort of taught me is that there are ways to imbue these experiences with technology to achieve bigger impact than was previously possible. On the left is a picture of a Nest thermostat. Fortunately, these products are now in tens of millions of households around the United States, and we were able to save enough electricity to power the entire US electrical grid for a month by putting connected thermostats into homes. And the problem we were solving was that most people weren't programming their thermostats. And when you left the house, you might have left the AC on running colder longer than you needed to. On the right, a new product I'm working on called Mill Food Recycler. And it turns out that the average American household throws away around $3,000 worth of food a year, but most Americans don't have any sense of just how much food they're wasting on a weekly basis. And in both of these products and experiences, the thing we were able to harness was we were able to start measuring things and communicating that to people in a way that they could take action. And it tends to be that the things that aren't measured don't move. So being able to meter and track and share that information, and as Robert said, tell a great story there that was actionable, we saw behavior change and we saw impact really come forward from that.
Cool. That's awesome. I think we'll dive a little bit more into behavior change as we keep diving in. But I'd love to maybe to now kind of talk a little bit more about some very specific examples that you, Robert, and Harry have kind of both had your hands in. Robert, you've kind of been like knee deep in data, I think, for the last couple of years as you've been building out Gilbert's plan where you play or play, sorry, what is it? I've got my thing mixed up.
Plan where you play.
Plan where you play, yes. And I'd love to kind of dig in, hear about what that's looked like as you've thought about capital investment there. Like what did that look like? How did it start? And like, kind of take us through the kind of like timeline and progression of like how you've used data to shape this campaign.
Yeah, and this has been an exciting topic because really it's been the last 2 years. And we were going over our Parks and Rec master plan. It was time to renew it. It had been since 2014. I wasn't with Gilbert when they went through their last one, and Gilbert was one of the fastest growing communities and still is in the United States. So you had a vastly different idea of what your master plan was in 2014 versus where you're going to in the new kind of the 2024 update. And the first thing when I talked to our consultants, my first question was simply, what's your record for community engagement that you've had in all of your outreach? And they told me the number, and my first response was, we're going to double it. And everyone looked at me like I was crazy. And what I tell people, especially on the call, is it wasn't to double it so that you could be number one on the list. That really has nothing to do with it. We wanted to double it because the best way to get the buy-in for the master plan is to have the community be the one who's really driving it. And if we're not doing everything possible for the community to get their feedback where they are, then we're doing it wrong. And so we really went away from the open house style of meetings. We launched right into going as far as having 6 or 7 different ice cream shops in Gilbert on the same day for the same 2 hours. Say that if you came to that ice cream shop and interacted with us, and we invited the police department and fire departments to join us, not only did you get free ice cream for that, but we were integrating that community engagement as part of the process.
Cool.
We had a mural that went across town that was a 30-foot mural that people could color on and draw on and tell us what they would like to see. Even went as far as doing a happy hour in downtown Gilbert, where at one of the local places that when people interacted with us, the consultants were there to do that. And when you think about it, we went from that perspective to having over 60,000 plus targeted actual engagements. That's not impressions. I mean, if you were doing impressions or engagements, it was hundreds of thousands, but there's actual tangible results of engagement. And when you think about a community of 290,000, 300,000, you're able to go to your council and say, we have targeted interactions, real-time data with 60,000 of that user base. It creates that credibility that you did it the right way, first off. So we always start from there. The community engagement's number one. It should always be what we look at. But then we started to get the data back. And I think at the same time, you have to be willing to take the sobering data along with the good, right? So we started to look at it and say, okay, our Parks and Rec system at that point in time, over the past 3-4 years, has been growing at rates that are unprecedented. So you can see a couple of them on the board, 63% increases in recreation and aquatics, 55% increases in special events. And when you think about that attendance and what that does to your programs and capacity limits over a 2 or 3 year period, it blew them out of the water. And this is not a 55% increase where you added 100 people. It's more in the 75,000 plus range, 100,000 plus range of additional users that we had in our system that we didn't have before. And being able to capture those numbers was so important. But we took it a step further and said, okay, how many of those users are not able to generate our services now because they are full?
Right.
Numbers came back at 28%. So 1/4 of all of our residents can no longer use our programs or rent our facilities because they're already booked. In case you're curious, the national average for that is about 3%. So being able to show right away that we are now at a 3% national average, we're at 25% and above, that users can't access our system because they're full, we have a problem. And then when you also take a step back and you know that 93% of those users rated their services as excellent or very good, that also shows, we are worth investing in as a group. And I think that's part of the story to show. At the same time, what this slide won't show is the next slide over in this presentation would have been, we are also ranked almost last in the top 100 communities in the available park space, in the amount of developed acreage, and the amount of playgrounds, et cetera. So in one way, we're showing, hey, we're doing these services at an incredibly high level and with these increased percentages. But nationally, we are tracking significantly behind in terms of developed amenities available for our community. In an area like Gilbert, which the average age is about 35, there are a lot of young families here. So it started to build that story that, yes, what we're doing is impactful and great, but we're not doing nearly enough of it. But the reason we're not doing nearly enough of it is because we need to invest in our infrastructure and build more. And so that started to build that narrative of where we were, where we currently are, and where we need to get to. And then that's where the community engagement played in, because when you have 60,000 touch points with your residents, there was no ambiguity on the types of amenities they wanted to see from us. And they were very vocal about it. And then we were able to start, talking to council about that. And I think later on we'll talk about what that investment led to. But that was sort of that story. And it couldn't have been done without being able to tell the good and the bad side of the storytelling. And the data was what really helped drive us through that, and that engagement. Yeah, that engagement and storytelling is a part of this. The connection with the community that we had throughout this. By the time it went to council, there were no doubts that we had hit all the different areas and sectors of Gilbert that they wanted to hear from.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and you said it a couple times too there, like the contrast, but also like the relativity, like the 25% residents like program, the saying that kind of there is the programs are too full. It's like, okay, that's impactful, but it's even more impactful when you say the national average is 3%. And so it's like, figuring out where you're like driving home those contrasts and can you really like take it home for somebody. I'm sure, Harry, there's your
Take
world.
it one step further. The national average for the programs and amenities being rated excellent or very good is 73% at that time. So you're showing a 20% increase not only in the quality, but then when your quantity isn't there, it just shows that investing in us is a good investment for the community moving forward.
Totally. Robert, I might just jump in actually with this question from the audience because I think it's kind of relevant and what you mentioned before. Can you maybe dig a little bit into, you mentioned it, the kind of division or team that is you actually invested into looking at data? Like what does that look like? Are you supported by council and commissions on investing into that space? Like how did you make that happen?
Yeah, I think we're absolutely supported by it. In fact, I think they're probably some of the most popular people in the entire department, from councils and boards wanting to hear from them.
Right.
And the reason is they don't lie with the data. And that's actually a joke in the office is we went out and found data storytellers and data analysts that were not parks and recreation professionals. They came from outside. And so they were not invested in that they wanted to have a Parks and Rec lens or focus. They had the data in mind and the storytelling in mind of what's real. So if I ask them to round up, their answer is no. So I don't have that leeway. So it's being able to trust that that information is accurate and credible is really where it all stems from. And so we invested. It's a data content strategist. It's 1.25 FTEs dedicated to that. And then actually, I give a lot of credit to the town of Gilbert because that really stemmed from management and council's vision of wanting to have data within all of the departments. Now we were able to do it a little faster, but that is almost in every single department now, and it's really credit to the town manager and council's vision to understand that if we invest in that, it's going to be better long term for the community and the council to have that credibility and trust at the impact that the government services are providing. So 100%, it's backed, by the team, and they've been able to see those results. I mean, we now have 20, high level functioning interactive dashboards that are live at any moment, and being able to show the impact of those and tell the stories from them in a way that sometimes when you're too closely tied into Parks and Recreation, you may not see the same story. So having people to keep you honest is so important.
That's awesome. Harry, I feel like this is like all music to your ears.
Oh, yeah, Robert is speaking my love language right now. Um, I would say a couple comments. One, something that resonated with me as sort of a management technique with data, sort of in the first portion of Robert's answer. What I got a feel of is that there was a maniacal focus on the engagement metric. And sort of one pitfall you can fall into, and I've seen teams fall into as you start to enter the universe of, hey, let's get some more analytics going, let's get some more metrics going, is you kind of get overloaded. There's 19 different KPIs that you're watching, and it can be difficult to drive metrics when you're trying to sort of keep too many things in balance. So something I heard, and Robert, I'm not sure if this is if I'm reading into this too much, but what really resonated with me and what I loved to hear was, hey, we've got this engagement metric. Let's really focus on moving this metric in a meaningful way. Not 1%, not 2%. Let's try to double it. And that can be just such a galvanizing lightning rod for a team and can do a lot even more than crazy advanced analytics, just getting everybody on the same page about a single metric. And then I think we'll talk about it in a second, but the journey from getting metric focused, building an analytical team. We can talk about hiring analysts and, kind of profiles to look for, to having a sort of a set of dashboards and views that you look at regularly is sort of the next phase you get into, and where you really start to get leverage on the infrastructure you've built and the tools that you've brought on.
Awesome. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about Harry, kind of this over to you, like in your world, I think something we've talked a lot about is like how, we can look at one single data point or a set of data but recognize that it needs to be communicated in different ways to really be impactful. Maybe tell us a little bit more about like what we're seeing on the visual here and like how you've thought about it in terms of also changing user behavior.
Yeah, so what we're seeing here is an impact report for a mill customer. And today, actually, in the Phoenix Valley, if you have a mill, there's a local farm, Recycled City, that will come to your house to pick up the byproduct of a mill and get it to the farm and grow vegetables and bring those vegetables back to your house. The key thing we think about when we think about reporting data back to the users of Parks and Rec assets or a thermostat or a mill in a home is personalization and relevance. I think today's consumer is actually pretty spoiled. They're used to opening up the DoorDash app and seeing a recommendation for restaurants that they might like, or even when you click into a restaurant to order from, here are dishes that you might like or might have ordered previously. When you navigate to Amazon.com, it says when you're looking at a product, people like you purchased a product like this. And there's one thing to have a bunch of data, but where we really see things click into gear is when that data can be folded up in a way that is personalized and is personally relevant. So we build a little report when we get material back from folks that folds up their personalized data. Hey, we collected this much material from you. It's going to a chicken feed output, and this is the specific environmental impact that your household's waste diversion is having on the planet. And it makes a difference. In terms of changing behavior, I'll use an example. We like just food to go into our devices, and sometimes we find fruit stickers in there. And if we inject feedback on fruit stickers, people listen to it and react to it. They say, well, mostly they say, I didn't put fruit stickers in there. But then when we see future batches, we see behavior change and less contamination. And I think it's really relevant when you can send actionable information that's personalized. Making something up in the Parks and Rec context, it would be one thing to say, please don't show up late to your court booking appointment. It would be another thing to say, hey, we noticed you were 20 minutes late to your last booking. Like in the future, can you please not do that? And these kind of small details that can be injected have a multiplicative impact on behavior change.
Love that. I mean, Robert, like personalization, I feel like we've actually had this conversation before about like how do we, work on using data to personalize messages to different types of parks and recreation users. If you know a parent has enrolled their kid into a swimming class in the summer, how are you kind of like curating suggestions for the programming that they should then sign up for in the fall? I mean, like Robert, what do you think? How do you think about like personalization and how you prioritize that in your department?
Yeah, I think it's everything. I think when Harry was talking, I was looking at the graphic on the screen thinking like, this is what I want to see in Parks and Recreation is a simplified version of what we see on the screen to show the impact that you are having. And I think that's where some of our softwares in the future can come into place. So imagine you're able to pull up that screen and now you're able to impact how many people you served last month overall in the community or last year. And what was that, if you're able to send out the surveys and you get those response rates, can that be a very simple graphic that's in here? One of the questions we asked in Gilbert is, did taking this class or program, do you feel it helped improve your wellness, whether it be social, mental, or physical? And that's something we track because if you're able to show that 90% of your participants believe that that really does help them build their wellness, well, that's what we're here to do. That's what we should be providing. And so when I say things like this, it's finding those impactful things to your community that you can quickly show on a graphic to show that impact. And in terms of the personalization, everything we do, I feel, needs to be personalized. So whether it's a survey, whether it's a welcome to a class, whether it's the way someone's interacting with a mobile app or being welcome to a league, the services and software are out there now. And I think it's up to us to make sure that we are personalizing that, to be able to make sure that they know that they're not just a number to us. That's a family, that's a community, and that's what makes people choose us over and over again. The fact that they do feel it's a community environment, because there are other options in the private sector.
Yeah, totally agree. I love that. Okay, we got a couple questions coming in, so I'm going to rapid fire a couple of them because they're relevant here. First one for you, Harry, from Brian, just asking about kind of like smart home device integration and like what this looks like in the future, talking about AI functionality. Like how do you all think about it in the world of Mill and your space?
Yeah, Brian, thanks for the question. And I can't specifically speak to Google's forward roadmap in detail, but I can share some general things that I believe will be really true. You know, there is a lot of talk about AI out there. And, you know, I think my perspective on it is that there aren't going to be many things where AI takes over 100% of a job or, you know, or a function or a product. But there are going to be most things where AI can augment and help with 30% of the work. You know, and I think as we think about the impact that AI can have across products, services, teams, efficiency, it's about figuring out the parts of the work where an application of AI can notch things forward and save an employee 10 hours a week on a task that they were doing manually and just prepare data easily so that they can make a key decision from it. Or pull information from a bunch of different sources and present it in a way that folks can digest it easily. So, you know, I think my feeling is AI is likely going to fold its way into everything we do, but AI isn't going to be 100% of any of that. And we can sort of think about it as a platform that we can all stand on that can help us clock forward.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Robert.
No, Rich, I was going to say, because I saw Marissa's question in the chat, and I think it actually leads to how AI could help with that. So if you think about a recreation platform, Gilbert has over 5,000 programs a year. Now, if you're a parent how are you supposed to go through 5,000 programs to figure out what you want to do? So imagine just being able to simply type, I have a 6-year-old wants to play soccer, beginner level, go. And we're only available on Tuesdays or Wednesdays. And it's able to break that down faster. And for me, that data and storytelling for Parks and Rec is, how can we get our users there in less clicks and faster amounts of time? Because if it takes them too long, we have lost them as a customer, because they're going to go find somebody else to do it with. And so that data and storytelling component, I think for us, we need to be focusing more on the user experience from the customer side, and how are we going to drive them to choose us quicker and want to come back easier. And I think that's kind of what speaks to what Marissa's question is. Those are all things that, and Harry brought that up too, that we need to be focusing on.
Yeah, I think like the right way to kind of think about it from my perspective is think about what we can do to create a better user experience and then figure out if there are ways that technology can deliver that. So it all starts with a focus on the user. And this is Apple, Google, sort of the world that I grew up in. How can we make a better experience for someone booking a class on their phone? You know, and to Marissa's point in chat, if we can surface a recommendation that is going to be reasonable for them, that works at a time slot that they don't have their kid already booked into, that's something that's worth investing in. You know, what I would caution folks towards is investing in technologies just for the sake of technology. You know, just throwing AI at a problem or just saying, okay, we're going to do AI stuff without having a good gut for what's the user problem we're trying to solve can lead you on the wrong course a little bit.
Yep, totally.
Marissa had another good question in the Q&A panel, and Marissa, I think we'll have a good opportunity to talk about what data to focus on sharing in a few more slides down here. So thank you for that.
Yeah, sweet. And maybe just one more tactical question before we move on. This one's over to you, Robert. Question about what platforms, and I think this is actually like a really relevant topic in general to actually kind of provide some like tactical guidance that folks can look into in terms of like, yeah, what platforms are you using to track data and like create dashboarding? Has there been anything that's really worked for the Gilbert team?
Yeah, right now we use Power BI as our system, and I think that stemmed from we sampled a lot of different products. And one of the things that I always encourage, especially from the municipal standpoint, is it's not only about Parks and Recreation. I think it's important to have those conversations with your other departments around you, because often what I see is one department goes off and wants to do one solution, a couple others are doing a different one, and then years down the road they want to compile all of them or go in a similar format. And also, these are larger investments. You have to make significant investments on these tracking softwares and platforms that you want to use. So I was a big believer in collaborating with the departments around you. Granted, sometimes it makes it more difficult, but I think at the end of the day, it actually makes you stronger, because if you're pooling together, it's just a better product at the end of the day. And then you have other data analysts from other departments using the same platforms, and it gives them an interconnected family to talk to when they're struggling with a particular item or issue. So Power BI has been our platform, but it's something that I definitely agree testing out pilots with and really doing your research and taking your time to find what works best for you and your organization. Really is where I'd start with.
Cool. Harry, do you have any other platforms that maybe Parks and Rec folks aren't that familiar with, but you think might be compelling to look at?
I've got some religion on different tools, but ultimately, I think Robert's point is good that you can kind of think about wide data being just as important as big data. And when I talk about wide data, I mean being able to triangulate and merge different data sets together. Tatiana had, a point in chat just now that, hey, sometimes it can be risky looking at responses in isolation. And if we can bring together different data sources, we can kind of start to look at things 360.
Mhm.
And look, I will share customers, users, citizens, they will lie to you as well in data. And, I have examples where we send a survey out and ask people, what is the feature you are most interested in having? And then we look at data from device usage, and people do the exact opposite thing, that they said they were going to do in the survey. And, it's not always black and white, and there is art and science in building the story and building the understanding there. And people don't always say people don't always do exactly what they'll say they'll do. So being able to integrate systems is important. I've used Power BI and like appreciate that tool at the visualization layer. I'm a Tableau person myself. But I think the important thing for both of those is as you're thinking about data visualization, are there ways to get data from different systems into those tools so we can bring it all together?
It's funny
Cool.
here. We actually started with Tableau as well, and then townwide went to Power BI. But real quick, Rachel, on Tatiana's question with the numbers being low, I do just want to say that is why I love having the data storytellers and analysts and strategists on staff, because they keep us honest. And I
Yeah.
really come back to that of being honest, because there's ways that I would interpret data that I am not the expert in. And I think that's also, being true to yourself and being like, if I'm not the expert in this, how can I find the people that are going to be honest with the data? Because that credibility is everything, as I mentioned before. And so one of the things that I may suggest is looking at how long your surveys are, how accessible they are, and if there's ways to shorten them up or making them more accessible after a class or a program. Even things as simple as thumbs up and thumbs down can even be powerful in certain settings, based on your particular need.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, it sounds like you all were creative too. And when you were gathering data, to have different types, like, your ice cream events, and then you had a happy hour. So it's like trying to make sure you're collecting from different audiences that you might get in each of those types of events as well.
We visited every HOA neighborhood party there was. So when you look at a map of Gilbert of where each engagement event was, it was covered. And I think that's a huge portion of how you build that trust.
Cool.
And look, I would say like we can't let perfect be the enemy of the good here as well. So, in a perfect world, response rate would be 100% of every citizen, with every, permutation of questions, but
And they don't lie.
they don't lie. And that's not always reality, but I think Robert, like your point of getting out into the world, and even if it's feels like you know, conversations with 100 people, that kind of qualitative information is actually really helpful in unlocking what's coming through in the quant data as well. So it's a little bit like cooking, where we're trying to, we have different ingredients and we're sort of balancing them to understand exactly what the story is.
Cool. Okay, just to move us along, I thought this would be really fun. So this to context for everyone, this was a little bit of a exercise that Harry was sharing with Robert and I the other day. That's all about, how you communicate data to different types of stakeholders. And I'll let Harry explain a little bit more. But when Harry was introducing this concept to us, what you can see there on the axis is kind of like a corporate ladder of like different types of people that you might see in like a private company. And so to bring this conversation into the relevant, the audience that we have here in front of us, Robert and I said, well, let's kind of like parks and recify these different types of stakeholders, and we'll kind of carry the conversation on from there. So we kind of converted this corporate kind of structure into different types of parks and recreation stakeholders, from rec managers and rec directors in the actual department, to a handful of different kind of more the city managers and the commissions that we're thinking about. So I just want to preview this. Harry, maybe you can take us through where we're going to go from here, and Robert and I will pepper in.
Sure. And I got to say, this framework was shared with me by a brilliant guy named Avinash Kaushik, who wrote textbooks on web analytics that were very influential, and was sort of at Google as a data evangelist. And his main point, and Marissa asked a little bit of a question like this, is given a single data source, there can be many different ways that you use that information and communicate that information to different folks. So, we with Rachel and Robert's help, we've sort of parks and recified this. Rachel, if you can click to the next slide. The first axis we're going to add to this chart is sort of for each of these constituents, there's actually sort of a different level of need to interact deeply with the data. And maybe we can click once more, Rachel. Thinking about a rec manager on the left of this scale, that's going to be the person that's going to want to be able to slice and dice, pull reports, what happened at this facility at this time of day, what's going on with this user's billing, how are we thinking about scheduling, being able to really get their hands into the data and play with it. As we sort of move rightwards, moving sort of that way on the axis, we get to a rec director, and that person is probably more interested in looking at a dashboard that might have some filters to be able to understand higher level trends and how information is flowing from a few different areas. It could also be dashboards that are across the city as well to provide that context. And then as we go even further up, thinking about the Parks and Rec Commission or a city manager, might not want to give those people all the bells and whistles and dials to turn of filters. They might not have all the context. Thinking more of static views of, hey, here's a snapshot on key KPIs reporting that's tailored to you. And then furthest to the right, thinking about city council, general public, really those folks are existing at the highest level. How are we progressing towards the departmental goals that we laid out X number of quarters, months, years ago? And this stack could exist with a single set of data, but there are multiple different ways that we could sort of clean it up and process it to make it maximally efficient. And in my career, I have fallen flat on my face where I built custom reporting that the equivalent of a rec manager loved and told me was the best thing since sliced bread. But when you put that in front of the city manager, the response was, what the heck am I looking at here, Harry? And there's really something to transforming and going back to analyses to put them in a format that makes sense. And Rachel, if you click once more, and I promise everyone I'll be quiet here in a second, there's kind of another axis we can add to this where now we've sort of turned this slide into a bit of an infographic. And this bottom axis is what is written English as a percentage of your communications, at this level. as you're thinking about it as an analytics organization. And when you're dealing with the rec manager, it's mostly passing data back and forth to that person. When you're thinking about the city manager, it's not data, data, data. It's paragraphs, paragraphs, paragraphs of explanation and probably a few metrics. So this is a big lesson that I continue to learn that, okay, you've got your data. Now there's work to actually transform that data into something that's actionable, and that's going to look different at different levels of the organization. Does that jive with folks? Robert, I'm curious if that resonates with you.
Yeah, it really does. What really resonated the most is when you talked about the director not having a lot of capability to mess with anything. So my team doesn't allow me to log into anything where I can actually change a cell because I screw it up every single time. So they
Keep
only
Rob,
send things my
keep,
way that I cannot mess up.
keep Robert read only.
100%, and they'd be the first to tell you, and I'm okay with that. But what I really love, and I'll take this a step back, is I always have to take it from the standpoint of when we're going to city council, what are they going to be looking for to best make a decision? And as a government professional, we have to take a neutral standing in that we're trying to be neutral in the way that we're approaching councils because we have to make sure that we're providing the information that's there to make difficult decisions. And I think when you really have that standpoint, it keeps you a little more honest and I need to provide this in a setting that's going to help make decisions, but that you're also not trying to lead. And I think that's the other thing some people fall trapped to sometimes is look, these are difficult decisions. You have to be empathetic with that and put yourself in that position and shoes of how you want to see the data to make those best decisions. So that's kind of how I love that you've, kind of created this chart because I do think it stems from that level as you go further and further down. And you think about the amount of information overload that's coming to Parks and Rec commissions or boards, the city manager, the city council. Our city council alone, if there's a week where there's a council meeting, they get a 3,000 page document that they're supposed to review 2 weeks, a week before that council meeting. So how much capacity is left before you get there? You have to put this data in a storytelling way that's easy to understand, easy to visualize, and that you can understand what the story is telling you without having to do a thesis on it. And
Yep.
I think that's kind of where you're getting to as you go further and further down. But at the same time, I want my staff at the level of the rec manager and the coordinators and the supervisors to be taking that thesis route because we want to analyze everything and always make sure that we are doing it to the best possible degree. When we get a survey back, it's not just about getting that survey, it's combing through the actual information and comments to see what kind of actionable strategies we need to take
Right.
to make it even better. So I kind of love the flow because you need to take the data from that side when you're first getting it in all the way into when you're presenting it to council so that they can make decisions that are often very hard. And you owe that respect and trust to them to put it in that type of format.
Yeah, I that all resonates with me. It's really you have tools on the left and recommendations on the right. And you can really overwhelm folks with throwing a bunch of metrics at them on the right side of the equation, even though the metrics are exactly what the people on the left want. And really being able to turn those insights into recommendations, that's the job that storytelling carries there.
Totally. I mean, and I think I pulled examples that both of you have thought about and worked on. And it's just crazy to see the distillation of what this can mean at the top level, which is like literally a single statement, a couple of words that really like there's so, and I'd love for you two to just talk about all of the data that probably is underneath these to get to these statements, but just like, how at the rolled up level, it can be as simple as a couple of words.
Yeah, and Rich, I'll dive into the 5.3 million visits, and that may help because where this stems from is when we were doing our master plan, we took all of the AI data from Placer at every park, trail, and rec center that we had for a year, and in 2022 we were at 5.3 million visits. And if you add that number now, we're well north of 6. Now, what's interesting is when you see that number, it may not mean much to you. It's like, okay, it's 5.3 million visits. What does that actually mean? So when we presented this, we took it a step further because I'm a big believer that Parks and Recreation is one of the biggest economic drivers in local communities as well. And I use data like this to help show it. So we took all of the other economic driver data that you see, things like Phoenix Suns games, Cardinals games, every professional sports team in the Valley. And we looked at all of their visits for an entire year. And if you totaled all of them together, it did not come to the 5.3 million visits that we had in Parks and Recreation annually. And then you think to yourself, what's the biggest attraction in Arizona in a year? It's the Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon drives that. If I were to ask how many people you think visit the Grand Canyon, numbers would probably be all over. It's just north of 5 million in that 2022 timeframe. So when you're able to say that just within our Parks and Recreation system, we are bringing in more users and visitors than the Grand Canyon does, what does that do in terms of decision makers to understand the impact that you are having, not just on the community, but the economy? And then if I take it one step further, I see Adam Robinson's on the attendee list. Adam's the director in Queen Creek, which is just our neighbor here in Gilbert. Imagine what happens when you start building in Gilbert's data with Queen Creek's data, with Chandler's data, with Mesa data, who are all around us, where you never know which city you're in when you cross the border because everyone's sort of next to each other in Phoenix. Think about the impact that has, because Queen Creek's building some of the coolest amenities there are right now, in parks and facilities, and then Mesa and Gilbert and Chandler. So that's a small sample size of that impact. And so I look at it and say, how can you find those moments of impact that are going to resonate? So, and I've had council members utilize this data as some of their talking points when they start talking about some of the financial investments that they're putting into the Parks and Recreation services. So I always try to find, how do you make it relevant?
Totally. I love that. And Harry, you're kind of a little thing below from, I think, the world of Nest. And like, I love especially the middle graph you have there that's kind of like compare again what Robert was saying about comparing that to others in your area. Like, how did you guys land on these types of statements?
Look, Marissa noted this in chat. I think it's a brilliant thing to have a baseline like, you know, our facilities are doing more volume than the Grand Canyon. And comparisons can really drive people to action. One of the behaviors we were trying to change with Nest was we want to get people to program their thermostats, change the set points by a few degrees, show them how much money they can save. And something that we found incredibly effective was talking about how you ranked versus others in your area. And when we would show an image like this to someone saying, hey, you're in the top 40%, we saw a lot more action there than if we said just, hey, you can do a bit better. And basically saying, here's how you're performing versus the broader community, got people running to their thermostats to make sure that the set points were correct or opening an app. I will just say, like, there is a ton of work under the surface, algorithms to detect when you were earning a leaf, what the set points were. And we put all of that complexity off to the side in this email and tried to boil it down just to 3 numbers. Didn't have to show all of the mechanics and all the hard work we'd done underneath the surface. Now, JJ had a question in chat, which I think was probably directed to Robert, but I feel like sort of speaking on it a little bit. The question was, hey, do councils boards ever say like, am I read only because, or, how do you deal with a council or board when they push for more data, when you're giving them the detail, when you're giving them the less detailed view, the sort of summarized view? And I would say generally, a best practice is to have the detailed data in your back pocket, to be able to grant access and sort of show the work when asked. But you can get in trouble when you go into a high level conversation, starting with deep information about here's the methodology and here's the bells and whistles. And then we sliced it this way and then we sliced it that way. And you can kind of lose people. I much prefer going in with the high level point. And then if people say, okay, but help me understand how you got there, then being able to circle back and say, okay, we can double click into that. Here's the methodological approach. Here's why we made some decisions this way and that way. Here are all the other things we're seeing that give us confidence that this is truthy. And,
Awesome.
Speaking as an analyst, sometimes we have desire to show our work. Oh, we did all this work. I want to get credit for all the work we did, but ultimately, like Robert said, folks are busy, and like leading with the punchline, starts things off in sort of the clearest, cleanest way.
Yeah, and Harry, I think that's where the trust and credibility becomes so important. Is because
It's a relationship.
if you don't have that before you even start to show this, you're always going to be working backwards. And so establishing that is so important. And then one of the things I always suggest is that's when you work with your city management and see if it's okay to meet one-on-one. It's sort of like it's hard to do on the dais, to be able to dive deep into the data, but have those conversations beforehand or invite a follow-up where you can then start filtering the data and going even deeper.
Yep.
Sometimes that behind the scenes look in a different setting, it's harder during an established council meeting, but much easier, in like a one-on-one format or a smaller group format. I think is really effective.
Trust is a huge part of this. Even though it's all numbers, there's personal relationships underneath the surface, and you need to make sure that the numbers you're publishing are real and true and or correctly caveated if there are potential issues with the data. Because if you find yourself offside, it can take a lot of time to rebuild trust. And nobody wants to feel like they're being told a story that doesn't have foundational truth beneath it.
Yeah. Rachel, one of the things that I think just touch on to finish that portion off is also from a staff perspective, make sure you celebrate the wins along the way. It's the one thing we always forget to do is when you do see those KPIs and metrics and data and the storytelling come through, make sure you're celebrating them with your teams and use them to highlight the great work your teams are doing. I like it even more for the inside of when we get a survey feedback on an individual instructor, share that with the entire department. Use it as a tool because most people think it's going to be used in the way of like, you're not doing your job or we're behind in this metric. I use it the exact opposite way, which is celebrate everyone around you. And then you get to highlight the great work the team is doing even more.
Yeah, love that. Okay, we only have a couple of minutes left, so I just wanted to ask you that both this kind of one final question, and I'm going to keep both of you honest to like a 90-second answer here. But if you had to leave this audience with kind of one piece of advice on how you would think about data to kind of elevate their parks and recreation work, what would that one piece of advice be? Harry, I'll go to you first.
All right, 90-second clock. I'm going to do two things. One, I'll echo something I said before. Really start with being focused on citizen or constituent outcomes, and then select tools, processes, dive into analysis in ways that you think you can drive towards that end goal versus saying, okay, we just need to like dataify this thing. Make sure you have that North Star. And then the second thing I would say is it really kind of is garbage in, garbage out. We didn't talk about it today, but data quality is really important. And if there are tools, platforms, et cetera, that can give you raw data or collect data in a way that is structured and easy to analyze, then you can spend more time driving decisions and driving outcomes and driving great charts versus, oh my gosh, this column name, this column header, this date format, I'm patching things together left and right. So I would say focusing on data cleanliness, and getting information in. And now there's so many great tools that once you have that information, you can do cool stuff with it.
Maybe we'll do a part 2 webinar on data quality next time.
Oh yeah, I'm sure like 4 people will attend. It'll be awesome.
Robert, over to you.
I could do this all day. I love this so much. But one of the things I always tell my team is stories make data memorable, but data makes the stories credible. And that's kind of where we start a lot of our focus is how do we do that? And the biggest thing I could say is it's worth the investment. All the things that I just talked about within Gilbert, that was an investment at the end of the day where Gilbert's now invested about $400 million into parks and recreation amenities into the future over the next 5 to 7 years. And that was through a sales tax, bed tax, and use tax that went through. Now, council took a really big risk at doing that because that's a huge investment in the community. He was also supporting some public safety projects as well, in the tune of about 700 million total. But using that data and storytelling provided that output to know that this is the right thing to do for the community. And those are not easy decisions to make. So our job is to always make those hard decisions easier to make and with the right information. At the end of the day, the other big thing that I'll tell for parks and rec agencies is if you're able to build your data and storytelling divisions and departments, make sure you're also doing it within your state and your other associations and organizations so that they can start to talk together. Yeah. I don't want it to be just about Gilbert. I want our Gilbert data people to be able to talk to Queen Creek and Glendale and Chandler and Phoenix and have a network. And so I see the same way that recreation is a part of Parks and Recreation. I would love to see data and storytelling just be another division that everyone has into the future.
Yeah, totally agree. That's awesome. All right. Well, I want to thank Robert and Harry so much for for being here today. You know, the webinar chat says it all itself. There's obviously, this was just a really engaging and exciting conversation. So thank you both. We will be having many more webinars, so please reach out to the rec team if there's any other things that you would like us to cover. I also thought I would do just a quick shout out to preview one of our next events. So this is for all you folks that are on the webinar that are Arizona based. We're going to be doing an in-person event about tech and innovation at Sloan Park, the spring training home of the Chicago Cubs. We don't have a date yet, but it's going to be early May. We'll have local invitations coming out, but please reach out to our team if you're interested in attending. And hopefully we'll have Robert there as well, and many others. So thank you all again. Really appreciate the engagement, all the questions. And again, thank you for joining us, Robert and Harry.
Thank you, everybody.
Awesome. See you all. Have a great weekend. Bye.
Care.